Hi, I'm Laura Calugar, Senior Editor with Commercial Property Executive, and you're listening to FTI Experts Hub, the quarterly podcast series with FTI Consulting specialists. The organization's real estate solutions practice recently conducted an interview among 1,000 people who work in a corporate office setting or home office setting to gauge their reaction to a hypothetical return to office mandate. What did they say, and what does that mean for office owners and tenants? We'll find out together from my two guests, Josh Herrenkohl and Ingrid Noone. Hi, Ingrid. Hi, Josh. Happy to speak with you both again.
Hello, nice to be with you.
Hi, Laura.
So what's your general view after seeing the results of this survey? How big is the disconnect between what employees want and what their employers are doing or contemplating doing?
Well, Laura, to put this discussion into context, about 41% of our survey respondents are currently fully remote workers, and the balance, or roughly 59%, work in the office either on a full-time or hybrid basis. The survey results indeed surface a disconnect in sentiment between those fully remote workers and employers seeking to implement return to office mandates. Employees who have become accustomed to working remotely value the flexibility and benefits of not having to commute into the office. A large number of these, over 74% in fact, indicate they would or would likely seek new employment, and some would even consider a pay cut in order to maintain their ability to continue to work from home. Whether these employees can or will realistically find alternate employment is a separate issue, and we'll address that in our discussion. But certainly for some workers, remote situations are very important. However, the survey also reveals that the majority of employees are excited or okay to be back in the office, either on a full-time or for some portion of the week. These employees cite a variety of reasons for enjoying in-office work, including enhanced productivity and improved collaboration and camaraderie within their organizations. So employers implementing or considering RTO mandates echo these sentiments when describing their reasons for having teams back in the office. So for a larger part of the workforce, the sentiments are aligned, and both the organization and its workers understand the benefits of being together in person.
Tell us more about how employees' current work model appears to impact their attitudes toward remote or in-office work. How do employees feel about return to office mandates?
Yeah, Laura, to answer the question, I think we need to first go back to 2020. So thinking back to that period, there was really overnight a shock to the system. No one thought that employees or work teams could be productive in a remote environment. But the timing was somewhat fortuitous. Video conferencing technology was on the advent of prime time, and suddenly corporate IT departments were scrambling to activate this new technology. At the same time, technology firms poured millions of dollars into video conferencing technologies to get it ready for prime time, and employees were forced to deal with the change of suddenly switching on video cameras. But the amazing thing was that it all worked. It wasn't seamless, but employees were productive. And this was a huge change from the paradigm that existed prior to 2020. So organically, this change might have taken years, but under the pressure of the new pandemic, it was almost overnight. It all worked, but then companies discovered that there were some cracks in the model. So for example, employee teams had difficulty truly collaborating together. It's just so much easier to do collaboration in person. Creative professions had difficulty being creative. Collaborative teams had difficulty collaborating. New hires out of college found that they were having difficulty learning over a Zoom call compared to sitting next to the person who is sharing stories, examples, and life experiences. And companies started to believe that they were losing accountability of their employees. So let's fast forward to 2025, and the pendulum has swung the other direction. Suddenly, organizations have started demanding that their employees return to the office. And for some workers, this is a welcome change. They like the camaraderie, the learning opportunity, the escape from the drudgery of the bland walls of their bedrooms and dining rooms. But for others, we're seeing that they're going to dig their heels in the ground. And that's just the gist of our survey result. Employees like the flexibility of remote work. They like the privacy. They like that no one's looking over their shoulder. And I think we're going to end somewhere in the middle. I think we're going to see a lot more people working in a corporate office environment, but maybe not 5 days a week. Maybe it'll be 3 or 4 days a week.
Mhm. To what extent are employees' views about return to office policies impacted by the industry in which they work in or the size of the company they work for?
Yeah, Laura, we're definitely seeing differences in the data. More respondents in certain industries are willing to work in office at least some of the time and cite the benefits from working in office. These industries include architecture and engineering, arts and culture, food, retail, and banking sectors. Conversely, the lowest percentage of respondents excited to or okay with returning to the office were in the government and the not-for-profit sectors. And when you think more about it, it's likely that the functional roles in organizations is really where the distinctions lie. Roles that benefit from creativity, collaboration, and teamwork benefit from being in the office and having teams engage in person in real time rather than through scheduled or Teams or Zoom meetings. Back office and support roles and roles where team members are spread across the country may fare just fine in remote situations. There's little benefit to workers to commute into the office only to have a full day of video meetings with coworkers spread around the country. We're also seeing a correlation in the data regarding the size of the employer. The larger the organization, the more employees are willing to work in the office on a full-time or hybrid basis. And the smaller the organization, the more respondents indicated they prefer not to be in the office at all.
Another interesting aspect that the survey highlighted was how employees' views vary across the map and among all the different generations. What were the results in this regard? Is there anything that surprised you?
Yeah, I mean, it's a great question. And there were a ton of really interesting insights that came out of the survey. So to start, our survey found that people who work remotely really value working remotely. And conversely, people who work in a corporate office don't value working remotely to the same extent. So that seems pretty obvious. But when you think about it, you realize that what people really dislike is change. It kind of makes sense. I mean, when I think back to the early days of the pandemic, everyone was complaining about working from home full time. They hated it, literally. They were counting the days until they could get back into the office. But now, after people have gotten used to remote work as the status quo, they don't want to go back to the office. I think a lot of CEOs are looking to pull off the Band-Aid, mandate that employees return to the office full time, and hoping that once they get through the initial noise, things will settle back to where things were before. Another interesting insight was that 74% of fully remote workers said they were likely to seek alternative employment if required to come back to the office full time. But what's unsaid is that these employees will look for a new job that is both remote and that has a similar level of compensation. The reality is that that is not reality. So while a large number of people may search for new employment, many of these people may end up remaining in their current position because they can't find a comparable remote position, or the position that they do find pays significantly less than the current one. And I'll just give you one more example, which is one other interesting point, which was an overwhelming majority of workers, including 88% of those working remotely, would be willing to come to the office for a portion of the week. So going back to my earlier point, we may end up finding a happy medium that both companies and workers can feel good about.
After a short break, Josh and Ingrid will share details about ways to sweeten return to office mandates. Stay with me. We'll be back in a few seconds.
Hi, this is Jessica Fuhr, Editor-in-Chief with Commercial Property Executive. I just wanted to make sure you know that the entries for this 2025 CPE Influence Awards are now open. We're ready to hear all about your most noteworthy properties, projects, and transactions. Does your office have unique design elements that attract tenants? Are you the top broker at your firm? Were you able to successfully reposition a property? We want to celebrate your successes. Email me at jessica.fuhr@cpe-mhn.com and I'll guide you through the entire process. The entries are due June 6th, so you have plenty of time. Thank you.
What message do you think all this data, all these figures are sending to employers and office owners? How can they, is there any way they can sweeten return to office mandates and avoid losing talent after all?
I think the data suggests that employers will likely reduce the size of their footprints to accommodate the new work model, which as Josh, I believe will be some type of hybrid model. whether by functional role or just across the entire organization. This will mean that employers will demand better, more modern spaces, even if at higher rents, that facilitate collaboration and productivity amongst their teams. Owners and landlords with newer Class A, highly amenitized office properties are in good shape to meet this demand, while office owners of properties not meeting these requirements will need to invest in their properties. I believe that top talent will not want to return to drab office environments.
Another thing that the survey found was that a third of office workers are or would be excited about returning to the office, as you said at the beginning of the conversation, Ingrid, primarily due to increased productivity, camaraderie, and opportunities for collaboration. So, although they like their work-life balance in this hybrid or remote work arrangement, the big downside is that they lose that connectivity with coworkers. In what ways can office landlords make use of this information?
The biggest practical takeaway of this study is that office landlords need to think about the future of their properties and specifically what will attract tenants. So the old adage in real estate is that there are three things that matter in a property. They are, in order of priority, location, location, and location. And that still holds true in part, right? But not all properties are created equal. So, consistently through the pandemic to today, Class A properties have thrived and pricing has held relatively steady. But it's been at the expense of Class B properties and below. And while office tenants are downsizing their space, they're at the same time willing to pay a premium for the smaller footprint that they do have. They're also looking for highly amenitized space. So in practical terms, this means less focus on traditional cubes and offices and more on high-end open plan space for employees to collaborate, create, and ideate. It means more shared and flex space, whether that includes lounge space, conference space, or non-traditional space throughout an office setting. Think about, the coolest office you've ever been to. It has little nooks and chairs and places you wouldn't expect. It has collaboration pods. It has quiet space for personal calls. It has really good coffee and comfortable seating. I also think we'll see access to more shared conference and amenity space, even if that space isn't exclusive to any one company. Tenants are looking for better technology to be provided by the landlord. That includes better access to building and tenant data or tenant-facing technologies that, for example, allow technologies to connect with local retailers, register for nearby events, et cetera. And I also expect that live, work, play, type mixed use properties will do well, particularly in larger urban areas. So setting and surroundings do matter.
But do you think employees really value and use and participate in events and use all the office amenities they say they want? Would they really be willing to give up their current work arrangement only to work in a state-of-the-art workplace?
Well, look, from an employer's perspective, I think this is less about creating a space that rivals someone's home office and more about creating a space that's conducive to productivity and efficiency. After all, the reasons that employees value remote work are convenience, lack of a commute, and the ability to be able to integrate personal and work lives in a way that would be impossible to do in an office environment. So I think that this next stage of RTO is going to be about less about convincing employees that they should return to the office and more about retaining high performers once they do, generating a return on investment for office space and labor costs. And that's going to be in the form of efficiency, retention, and talent attraction. After all, real estate's typically the second or third largest expense for most corporates, and companies will ask themselves what they get out of the significant investment that they're making in their office environment.
Over the past few years, there were some big companies like Amazon, Boeing, UPS that have initiated return to office mandates for 5 days a week, so full-time in office for at least some of their employees. And then President Trump signed an executive action calling federal employees back to their desks. What kind of signal does all of this send to the labor market? Are you expecting more companies, big or small, to follow suit despite the backlash from some employees?
Yes, well, as you suggest, more and more we're hearing about employers rolling out full-time to return to office mandates. I mean, we read about it daily, right?
Right.
Setting aside the federal government's RTO full-time mandate, which really seems geared to quickly reducing the size of its workforce, I believe most organizations considering RTO are doing it to maintain and build their culture, to better train and develop their teams, especially their younger professionals, and to improve productivity and collaboration. And yes, even perhaps to improve employee accountability. Whether employees and employers have the upper hand in how successful RTO mandates will be, and whether organizations will lose top talent by enforcing RTO, will be largely dependent on how well the economy runs and how tight the labor market becomes. While it's probable that a subset of the workforce will always value remote work opportunities above everything else, the majority of employees will seek opportunities that provide the best overall combination of salary and benefits, career development and advancement opportunities, and organizational culture, even if it means working in the office all or a portion of the time.
You mentioned the labor market, which seems to remain strong for now. There's low unemployment, low levels of layoffs, so workers have good job security. But at the same time, companies have pulled back on hiring, making it quite challenging for job seekers to actually find a new job. So as an employee, saying that you would quit if your employer requested you to fully return to the office at your current salary is quite risky, since there aren't many alternatives out there. What's your take on this?
Yeah, you're absolutely right, Laura. To date, the economy has remained strong and unemployment's been low, but we have no way of knowing what's around the corner. And a big part of what actually happens depends on the health of the economy. Regardless, I do think that the trend is for corporates to require their employees to come to the office for some portion of the week, even if it's not all 5 days. And if that's the case, the laws of supply and demand would suggest that the number of completely remote jobs will become smaller, but so will the salary, benefits, and other perks that come with these roles. In our survey across all demographics, salary was consistently the factor that rated highest in terms of what employees value the most. So if the compensation for relatively fewer remote jobs becomes less, it's very possible that employees will stay in their current jobs, bite the bullet, and come back to the office if they're told to do so. But I do think that we'll see a continuation of greater flexibility in the new model versus the more rigid office requirement of pre-pandemic times. I also think we'll see significant upgrades to old, tired office spaces, improvements to amenities, and improved technology all around.
So what are your expectations? Will we ever go back to the 2019 status quo when it comes to where people work from? Is this a progressive thing toward what we used to know in 2019?
Over the long term, Laura, I don't expect we'll ever get back to the 2019/pre-COVID status where most employees are full-time in the office.
Mm-hmm.
I think most employees, more employees will be required to work in the office than do so today, for sure. But there will be more flexibility, as Josh suggested, and likely a hybrid model. As he said, 88% of our survey respondents that work completely remotely today are willing to come back to the office for at least a portion of the week. Employees with certain functional roles will be in the office more and more, where they benefit from that collaboration and proximity to their peers and colleagues we discussed. Technology enhancements made over the past 5+ years allow employees to be productive from home when needed. Employers across industries will seek to find the right balance for their organizations between fully in office, hybrid, and which roles in organizations can be remote and not hurt the organization.
Yeah, and I would just add a couple of points. I largely agree with Ingrid. The future will certainly not look like 2019, but I also don't think it's going to look like 2024, 2025. I think offices will continue to be the nucleus of where employees congregate, work, collaborate, and create. We've certainly proved that employees can be productive outside of the office environment, but for most employees, the corner of their living room won't be the primary work location. So as we have seen, technology has continued to evolve and will continue to evolve. And I have no doubt that as new technologies emerge, there'll be new ways for employers and employees to find a good balance in their work together.
Josh, Ingrid, thank you very much. I appreciate your time.
Thank you, Laura. Appreciate your Yeah, thank you for taking the time to speak with us today.
Thank you all for listening. If you enjoyed this episode, please rate and review it on the podcast platform you're using. And for the latest news, trend stories, and podcasts, check out CP Executive every day. Now you can also share your own voice with our audience through the CP Executive Council, a platform dedicated to CRE leaders who want to stay in touch with each other and discuss trends and issues affecting the real estate industry. All these valuable insights are regularly posted on our website. So if you're interested in having your voice heard, just click on the CP Executive Council button at the bottom of our homepage.